Hello, my name is Patrick and I'm a theatre maker based in Belfast. Creativity has served my life in huge ways that have helped me to envision who I am. It has been a constant companion to me since childhood, and it has allowed me to empower myself, not just as an artist, but as a human being. It's become very clear that a lot of people don't feel like they have that creative potential, and so it feels like a very, very important topic to talk about in line with our current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic. So creative potential to me, every human being is unique, and every human being holds creative potential, and every human being has that right to express their creative potential. And creative potential and the imagination, to me, appears in mind through thoughts, through ideas, through forms, and some abstract forms such as the imagination. It also then appears in the body as energy, as a form to do, to make, and to create. And so, in a way, what creative potential is it is the manifestation of your invisible world, which then becomes visible through you being able to create something. And so that's really where creative potential belongs. For me, creativity is sacred. It's holy in a way, and it's holy in a secular way. Creativity is about having an intimate dialogue with your own inner universe, and through that dialogue, you're able to have that ability to create change, to envision your own life, and to make decisions that belong to you, but that are part of your instinct, that are part of your imagination. And through all of that, I think what's really important as an artist is that creativity, that invisible to the visible, I use play as that form, because play for me is when both of them unite together in a single moment. So when you're in rehearsal as an actor, for example, rather than being thinking or being limited by your mind, I allow that freedom of play to allow you to be free in that moment. So within that, we have a beautiful sense of spontaneity. We have a beautiful sense of complete abandon in terms of what is my mind thinking. It's irrelevant, because in that creative flow, which is what I would call it, we start to discover the true voice of that human being or artist. Unfortunately, though, as I mentioned before, I've met so many people who don't feel like they have creative potential. It feels removed from them. A lot of people feel that arts and culture isn't a part of their lives, when it is essentially who they are. But because it's so simple, it's easily overlooked. So what I'm interested in is, and what I'm going to talk about today as well, is how it has affected me, how creativity has helped shape my life for who I am. Okay, so I was brought up on a council estate, quite a rough council estate, and obviously coming from a working class background, there were challenges growing up emotionally, financially, but I remember there was one moment where, and it sticks out in my memory, when I came home from school and I was locked in my bedroom, and rather than doing homework, I started to create kind of shadows on the wall. And from that, I remember it very, very clearly. From that moment, I started to create story. I started to imagine myself in epic battles. I started to play with my own imagination. And that really helped, because, from then on, every day, I would run home and I would be delighted to be in my bedroom, and I'd be delighted to kind of use my imagination to take me into these new stories. What served me the most with that is I started to use that to cope with reality. And I think it's really important. It wasn't an escape from reality. It was being able to creatively understand who I was in that time, using my imagination. From then, I used to bring my teddies downstairs to make me watch, get them to watch me in plays. I used to get the lads in the council estate, I used to beg them to come on these creative adventures with me. And of course, it became very apparent that I was slightly odd because I was spending more time creating story and creating these beautiful kind of landscapes and worlds that a lot of people didn't really understand that. And so, you know, of course, the usual name calling, Paddy the sissy, Paddy no mates, is Paddy a girl? It was, you know, it was very, very clear that how I was living was deemed quite odd. But it didn't bother me. It didn't bother me in a way that I was able to, again, use those insults, use that way that I felt different and actually celebrate that. Again, this is all in hindsight because at the moment I was just carefree and happy to be able to use my imagination. When I was 13, I then auditioned for a school show, and I sang the scales in the yard, and the teacher said, "Well, come to the assembly hall after rehearsal, to rehearsal." And I remember there was graffiti on the school wall, said "No gay, no freak, no Patrick." So obviously, I had to walk past that to go into the rehearsal. It was at that moment in rehearsal that the penny dropped for me in terms of what it was that I was feeling and doing. And again, I would call it the creative flow. In that moment in rehearsal, everything came alive. I felt hyper aware. I felt extremely confident, and I felt that I had come home in the world of the play. So then I kind of lived my life, you know, using the imagination to cope with my reality, but also to celebrate myself in that reality. And it was when I was 17, 18, one of the teachers in the secondary school asked me to stand up because obviously I was annoying him because I couldn't afford the books that I needed for that class. And he stood me up and he started to ridicule me about my sexuality, about my poverty, that I wouldn't amount to anything in life. And obviously there was lots of people sniggering and laughing. And in that moment, I went really deep inside. And I remember the feeling, the heat in my face, the sense of the palpitations I was feeling. But in there, I decided I didn't need to fight that because it wasn't true. What he saw was the outside, the influences, but what was in my internal world was very, very different. It was beautiful, it was creative, and it was free. So I just told him to F off. And I felt like I won. I felt like that was a victory. I felt like I finally understood something about me. When I was 17, 18, I had the opportunity to meet with this shamanic healer, a Sangoma. And she offered some healing, and she then invited me to participate in some of these ceremonies and the rituals. And I fell deeply in love with the whole way she worked with the people in the room, her community. The communion that she had with those people was beautiful. And I remember feeling a very deep connection with everybody in the room through her, because she was the storyteller, she was the healer. She made the invisible visible. That's what she was able to do. She was manifesting the healing into a very physical, visible form. And again, that for me is the exact same thing as the arts. They belong in the same world. You know, as an artist, we take the invisible, we make it visible. As a shamanic healer, they take the invisible visible. And as a human being, we're constantly thinking and using our imagination, which then we make visible. So again, that was another huge penny drop moment for me, because then I decided to take a career in the arts, and I dedicated my dissertation to the shaman, which was titled Ritual, Theatre and Healing. I'm now artistic director of Tinderbox Theatre Company in Belfast, and our entire mission is to give people that opportunity to recognise their own creative potential. And that comes in many forms. It comes through live performance, it comes from some of the training programs, and it comes from even working in communities, or prison, for example. And it comes from the same mindset. We're here to free up the invisible imagination with the physical, the visible, to give you a sense of freedom, spontaneity, and a celebration of life. So this year has been incredibly challenging and difficult for everyone with the COVID-19 pandemic. But something that has become very clear and apparent is that the arts, it's on the periphery of our society, and I think it's now the right time to start integrating the arts through everybody's lives, to kind of tear down the labels and to kind of give everyone that freedom to be themselves fully. For me, if I can go back to the role of the shaman and the healer, and that role being fragmented as we evolved, the shaman's role was broken into the lawyer, the doctor, the politician, and the artist. And for some reason, though, we've focused our society's values and morals on the three other disciplines of law, politics, and medicine, and we seem to have allowed art to almost diminish in its own power. And I feel that due to that separation, we have this huge loss of power, both individually, collectively, and as a society. And what's really odd is that art is here. It's always been here. It's not something that is separate from us. But the way we view arts and culture is that it's something that we don't do, or that we're not part of, when actually every single human being on the planet engages in using their imagination. So for me, it's about, this is now the right time to look at how we look at art, how we look at our imaginations, and that we understand that it is for everyone, and everyone has it in abundance. And what we have to do is we have to tear down the labels. We need to tear down the boundaries and the barriers that law has kind of set up in terms of that, accessibility, inclusion, and really open up that sense of freedom and community. I mean, one of the big things for me is during lockdown, I really missed community. I really missed this sense of being in a room with people. I missed this sense of working with other artists, engaging in workshops. I missed that presence of humanity in the room. And that's something that theatre has, the arts have. It's overwhelming, like when you go and see a live performance, you feel the breath of everyone in that room. That's communion. That's linking back to the shamanic healing. It's about us being brought together, losing our identities, and being in a moment of mystery with art. And so I feel that we need to look at how we can stop that separation. We can stop that sense of art is not some exotic prize. It's something that is in everyone, with everyone, and for everyone. And I believe that we need to now think about a new ecology, a new way of thinking, a new way of working that's not linear, that's not got signposts of targets and success and capitalism, but actually an all-rounded ecology where there is constant recycling of form and ideas and people, and so that everyone feels like they're part of something bigger than ourselves, which we are, and which is what the imagination gives us. I think what's really important at this time is that don't close up. So don't close the mind, don't panic, don't give yourself that sense of external validation or expectation on yourself as a human being. But also if you're hoping and that you work in creative arts, don't give yourself that expectation and don't give yourself that closure. Remain open and then just rest in that place. I think what happens a lot of us is that we are always of course, because we live in a society where it's all about productivity, it's all about expectation, it's all about success, it's all about when you're going to produce the next piece of work, or how are you going to do that. When you're always faced with that kind of external influences on your mind, you start to actually lose creativity. You start to lose a sense of creativity in the work that you're actually making. And that was even before lockdown. Now that we're in a new normal, I think it's really, really important that you're able to rest in just enjoying what you're doing in the present moment, And those voices and that kind of niggling sensation of going, this is not good enough, etc., that's not going to go away. That's been made by our society, that's a construct. But as an artist and as a creative, just rest in the smallest thing, and do it for you. Don't do it for gratification or for external approval. Do that thing for you.
Connected with lines we can't explain. Voices in your mind, and your heart's working overtime. Yeah, your heart's working overtime. You said tell me something I don't know, something that feels right. Give me an insight. You said tell me something that ain't real, something I don't wanna feel in my mind. You told me I wear black all the time. Well, it's just me just mourning my own life. Or is it just a change in the time? I don't care, this is me, I'm free, I'm back. I don't care, this is me, I'm free and I'm back. You said tell me something I don't know, something that feels right. Give me an insight. You said tell me something that ain't real, something I don't wanna feel in my mind. Take this away. I don't love you, but I want you to stay. Take this away. I don't love you, but I want you to stay. You said tell me something I don't know, something that feels right. Give me an insight. You said tell me something that ain't real, something I don't wanna feel in my mind, in my mind. I don't love you, but I want you to stay. Take this away. I don't love you, but I want you to stay.
I'm an electronic musician and producer, an artist and a session musician, and yeah, I think I've been doing the electronic music thing for about 5 years. And before that, I played in bands, rock bands, mostly. but also worked as a session musician in studios and various gigs, carnival gigs and things with lots of drums. Always playing bass guitar, and at some point got bored and decided to make my own music instead of making music for and with other people. And I've been doing that for about 5 years relatively successfully. But, you know, define success. I've released 6 albums under the name Arvo Party. I tend to be quite productive, which wasn't really the plan at the start. That's just sort of how it's gone, because music is a form of therapy for me, and I sort of can't stop creating things. I started making music probably when I was about 16 or 17. I'm quite privileged in as much as I'm a twin, so I always had somebody to bounce ideas off, musical, otherwise. And so we sort of learned instruments together and joined bands together and sort of wrote songs together. So everything that we wrote, we felt was twice as good than it actually was. And I think if I hadn't been a twin, I probably wouldn't have had the encouragement to start creating and keep creating and to keep learning. And I think as a result of that, that's how I ended up being a musician, because we were always encouraging each other. And then, yeah, playing in bands in garages, playing cover songs and just trying to learn other people's songs, trying to learn an instrument without any pressure. I was never pressured into making music by my parents or by anyone or by like a peer group. It was just something to do out of curiosity and for fun, and because you're interested in it, not because you felt like you had to or just because you wanted to and you were curious. And there's a lot of people out there who've been pushed towards an instrument or some sort of musical endeavour that they didn't want to, and I can understand how that would put people off, but everything I've ever done has been out of curiosity. I took a couple of breaks from music over the last 20 years, which is how long I've been doing this, longer in fact. And the only reason I ever took breaks was because I sort of stopped enjoying it. And I think it's okay to take a break. I don't think you have to, you know, if you're not feeling the urge to be creative or to do that thing that you're supposed to enjoy, I don't think you should push yourself to do it, because otherwise you're not being honest, you're not being true to yourself. So I was in bands for years, and then at one point the band stopped, and then I still wanted to make music, so I started making music on my own under this Arvo Party name, which is very different to making music in a band, because there's less pressure and there's more pressure in two ways, or in some ways, because you don't have anyone to bounce ideas off. You kind of have to rely on yourself to be the sort of creative judge of everything you make, but you also have to push yourself to do the creating. Nobody's going to turn around to you and ask you if a song is finished yet. It's all on you, which I quite enjoy, but can also be quite stressful because you can't tell what's good anymore. I think music is important for any number of reasons. I'll tell you why music is important to me. Music to me is important because for me apart from the fact that it's my business now, apart from the fact that it's creatively, it's what I do, it's a form of therapy for me. It helps me to work through things, and it gives me something to focus on. And I'm sure for any number of creative people it's the same, that whether you're making art or whether you're taking art in, it gives someone something to focus on, and it gives someone it gives you something to feel about, if that makes any sense. For people who can't feel, for people who feel too much, it gives you something to feel about. I was thinking about this thing that like if I write a song, if I write a track and I release it, just because I release it, that doesn't mean that it's finished. And if somebody listens to it, even then it's not finished. It's closer to being finished because they've put their emotions to it and they've had an experience with that piece of music, but the next time that experience is going to be different again, which is why that's why music lives on, I think, and that's why art lives on. You can't you can only digest like food once, for example, but you can have as many experiences with music and with art as you want, and every time you have that experience it's going to be different. And I think that's really important. And I think it's important to go back to those things and to see how much you've learned, or to keep learning if you can. This year I'd always planned for this year to be a productive year for me. I sort of came into this year knowing that I had maybe 3 albums kicking around in the back of my head, sort of half finished. And then as the months went on, I thought, well, maybe I'll actually get all 3 out. And then, obviously, all of this happened, and the world kind of stopped. And I was supposed to be on tour a lot this year. I was supposed to be on tour, I think, for like 5 months or something this year. So all of a sudden I had all this spare time, not spare time, but time when I couldn't go and live the life that I would normally live. So I sort of threw myself into finishing the ideas that were in my head and trying to make them make sense to release them. So I've released 5 albums this year, but I finished 7 or 8. I do realize that's quite a ridiculous amount of music to release, but for me it's about experimenting, and it's not about trying to fit into a schedule. Although I'm joking with myself that I want to release an album a month this year. That's not really going to happen, but you never know. If I didn't make the music that I make, I would literally be sat staring at walls and listening to other people's music and comparing myself to it. So creating helps me, not only does it help pass the time, it helps me to focus, and it helps me to calm my mind. Because I feel like my mind kind of swims about the place, and if I'm working on something, then I have something to focus on, and I have like a goal to get towards. And in terms of productivity, the productivity is a byproduct of creativity. Like, you can't really produce anything unless you create something. So the fact that I'm able to focus means that I'm able to be more creative. I never really planned to be as productive as I am. Everything that I release is just an experiment that's gotten to a point that I think is acceptable to be released into the world, or a place that I'm happy with. The lockdown thing has been kind of strange because a lot of people have been putting pressure on themselves to be productive, and it's also been a strange time for everybody's mental health, so I could understand why people would find it difficult to be productive in the last few months. But I think the issue with that is that people put pressure on themselves to release something by somebody else's standards, and I think you should only really be creating by your own standards, by whether you're interested in it and whether it gives you pleasure and whether you're curious about it and whether you're having fun experimenting with whatever medium that is. Otherwise, I don't really think there's any point. If you're not enjoying making music, why are you doing it? And if you have low quality control like I do, then brilliant. Or if you have a very specific idea in mind and you know exactly what it is that you want to do and that's perfectly achievable, then that's even better. The way that I work is by a series of experiments that kind of guide me towards something. There's no real end goal beyond to experiment and create. And I think that that's a way of working that's always worked for me, and I think that any kind of art should be an experiment. And I think that's the best way to get started, and my advice for anyone would be to experiment and to have fun experimenting, as you would with anything else. It's like you when you're a kid and you used to just mess around with stuff. Like my daughter just messes around with things and has the best time doing it, and she's not trying to achieve anything, she's just figuring out her place in the world and what these things do. And that's what I like to do with music, is to just experiment, and that takes the pressure off. So my advice to anyone who would be having trouble with writer's block or any kind of creative endeavour would be to treat it as an experiment and see where it goes, rather than to say to yourself, oh, I have to have this done by such and such a time and it has to be this way. That's not art, you're commissioning something for yourself then, you know, rather than just playing with something and seeing where it goes. And yet sometimes it won't go anywhere enjoyable, but sometimes it will.
Hey, it's Gemma Bradley. I am in my garden, the sun is shining, and I'm about to perform my brand new single, Obsessed.
We haven't spoken since Amsterdam. My friends say you're creeping, and what's up with that? Boundaries you do not understand. You should go your own way. Self-fabricating. I can't take you anymore. Self-fabricating. You red falling through the floor. Byline's crazy. What do you take me for? I fool, baby. You can't say so. Give me up your mind and I feel like you can't say so. But one day alone and I know that you can't say so. Take back control and you lost it. You can't say you're obsessed. Obsessed. You're obsessed. Obsessed. Ding ding, here we go again. Your name pops up in the DM. What land are you living in? But you're so deluded. Just suffocating. I can't take you anymore. Self-fabricating. You're up falling through the floor. Byline's crazy. What do you take me for? I